In the opening, set in New York City in 2022, a city now overcrowded with 40 million people, Detective Thorne is at his apartment, where he lives with his friend Sol. Thorne turns on the television, catching a news segment featuring Governor Henry Santini discussing Soylent Red and Soylent Yellow. However, Sol, clearly uninterested, abruptly switches off the TV. Thorne, busy shaving, asks Sol whether he made any progress on the case he had previously given him. Sol responds, though not in a way that satisfies Thorne's expectations. As they talk, the power goes out, prompting Sol to jump onto a bike generator to restore electricity. Meanwhile, Thorne, preparing for his night shift, steps outside. He carefully navigates over people, both children and adults, who are sleeping on the stairs as he heads to work. The city is portrayed as a place overwhelmed by scarcity, with food and essential supplies running low. People appear to be suffering, and there's an air of tension and chaos all around. Once inside a car, Donovan hands Gilbert a meat hook, implying that he's giving Gilbert a plan for an assassination. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a man named Mr. Simonson enjoys a relaxed conversation with his much younger wife, Cheryl. She expresses her gratitude for the gift he gave her, but their conversation is interrupted when their bodyguard Tab arrives. He reminds Cheryl that they have an appointment to go shopping for food. Later at the market, Cheryl tries to jog the shopkeeper Brady's memory about a special request she made. Brady, however, hasn't forgotten. He leads her inside the shop and presents the rare beef she had ordered previously. Gilbert makes his way towards Simonson's house, carefully digging into the wall to help him climb up. He jumps over the fence and approaches the house quietly. Inside, Simonson is in the living room, sipping on a drink, when he suddenly notices Gilbert's unexpected arrival, clearly startled by the intrusion. Gilbert, however, plays it off, trying to distract Simonson. Without warning, he swiftly pulls out the meat hook and stabs Simonson from behind, killing him instantly. Following Simonson's death, Charles, the owner of the building, provides Detective Thorne with information as he begins investigating the case. Once inside, Thorne presents his police ID to the bodyguard, with Cheryl also present in the room. He proceeds to examine Simonson's lifeless body and questions Tab, the bodyguard, about Simonson's personal life. Afterward, Thorne requests a bottle of the drink Simonson had been consuming and instructs the bodyguard to step into the foyer to write up a statement. Before leaving the room, Thorne washes his face with soap in the bathroom, then gathers the soap, towel, bottle, and some booze, stuffing them all into a pillowcase to take with him. Thorne returns to question Cheryl further. As part of his investigation, he checks her hands and other visible body parts, asking if Simonson had ever been rough with her. Cheryl firmly denies it, explaining that Simonson was a gentleman and would never behave that way. She also assures Thorne that she's professional and wouldn't engage in anything that could risk her job. As Thorne continues his questioning, the sanitation squad arrives, interrupting the conversation. They begin removing the body to transport it to the waste disposal plant. Thorne returns to his apartment, hitching a ride in the back of Wagner's team's vehicle. Inside, he hands Saul the items he took from Simonson's apartment, including a book titled Soylent Oceanographic Survey Report, covering both Volume 1 and Volume 2. Saul is taken aback, clearly not expecting Thorne to bring all of this back. He asks where Thorne found the book, to which Thorne responds that it was on the shelves in Simonson's apartment. Saul's excitement grows when he sees the beef, but his joy quickly fades into sorrow, and he pulls back, nearly brought to tears. Thorne reassures him, telling him that they're doing just fine, before leaving Saul alone to process everything. Thorne returns to work, where the office is crowded with people lining up to collect death benefits for recently deceased family members or friends. Ignoring the commotion, Thorne heads straight to the office of Hatcher, the chief detective. He shares his growing suspicion that Simonson's death was likely an assassination. Thorne points out that nothing was stolen from the apartment, and the way Simonson was killed seemed far too precise to be a random crime. What troubles Thorne even more is that the building's advanced security systems, including alarms and surveillance cameras, were conveniently offline the night of the death, something that hadn't happened in the last 2 years, adding to the suspicion Simonson's bodyguard Tab was conveniently out shopping with Cheryl when the murder took place. Thorne expresses to Hatcher that he believes Tab might have been involved in Simonson's death. The following day, Saul finds himself in a large, distracted crowd where people are anxiously lining up to buy something scarce. Meanwhile, Thorne from a distance notices Tab leaving his apartment. Sensing an opportunity to investigate without Tab being around, Thorne heads to the apartment building. Upon arrival, he encounters an armed security guard. Thorne knocks on the door, and a woman named Martha answers. She had been eating something and quickly hid the jar she was using, leaving the spoon on the table before opening the door. Thorne briefly inspects the apartment and questions her about Tab's whereabouts. After his brief investigation, he leaves, but not before discreetly taking the spoon with him. Later, Martha realizes the spoon is missing and becomes angry once she understands what Thorne has done. Later that evening, Thorne returns to his apartment, where Saul has prepared a meal using the food Thorne had taken from Simonson's place. They both savor the rare, flavorful meal, a far taste from the usual fare. As they eat, Saul shares the findings from his research on Simonson. He reveals that Simonson had been a member of the board of directors at Soylent Corporation, a powerful and influential position. Thorne then slick hands Saul a spoonful of the strawberry jar he had taken from Tab's apartment. Saul tastes it and in surprise remarks that Tab's furniture is indulging in luxury, a jar of strawberry jam worth around $150. The expensive treat strikes Saul as a clear sign that something is off, as such an indulgence is highly unusual for the mistress of a mere bodyguard. Later that evening, Thorne opens the call bar and places a call to Hatcher. He informs Hatcher that Simonson was not only a wealthy man, but also a director of Soylent Corporation, and that his bodyguard, Tab, had somehow acquired a $150 jar of strawberry, which is a luxury far beyond his means. Hatcher listens and then instructs Thorne to come to the office to formally report the case before hanging up. However, what Thorne doesn't realize is that during this conversation, Donovan, the man with a shady connection to Simonson's death, is sitting in the office with Hatcher, silently observing the entire exchange. Cheryl is hosting a party at her apartment with a group of friends who are casually smoking and drinking. The atmosphere is lively when unexpectedly, Thorne shows up and knocks on the door. When Cheryl opens it, Thorne isn't particularly surprised to see the group of women enjoying themselves. Cheryl and Thorne retreat to the bedroom, where she quietly locks the door with the push of a button. Thorne instructs her to lie on the bed and she complies, preparing herself. However, Thorne's focus remains on his investigation, and he begins questioning her about Simonson's relatives and friends. Cheryl mentions the name of one of Simonson's acquaintances and recalls how Simonson had taken her to church a month prior, where he spoke with a priest. She also shares that Simonson had been acting strangely in the time leading up to his death. As the conversation shifts, Thorne's investigative demeanor softens. The tension between them changes, and they end up making love on the bed. Meanwhile, Charles barges in furious and yelling at the women for slacking off. He starts hitting them, but Thorne soon returns to the living room and steps in to stop Charles from inflicting any more harm. Thorne firmly tells Charles that the women were there for questioning, not to be mistreated. He warns Charles that if the women decide to file a complaint, it could become a problem for him, commanding Charles to get out of his face. Afterwards, Cheryl asks Thorne to stay with her, but he initially declines, saying he has other things to attend to. However, she playfully changes his mind, reminding him there's a hot shower waiting and offering to make him breakfast, teasing him that she can do anything he wants. Realizing her intentions, Thorne doesn't hesitate any longer. He decides to stay, and the two share a shower together. Afterward, Thorne makes his way to a nearby church. Upon arriving, he discovers a dead woman lying at the gate with her young child by her side. Compassionately, Thorne picks up the child and takes them inside, handing the child over to a nurse before heading toward the priest, Father Paul. However, Father Paul is nearly catatonic from exhaustion, struggling to recall Simonson, even though Simonson's wealth would have made him stand out among the impoverished people who typically visited the church. When the priest finally does remember Simonson, he reveals that Simonson's confession deeply disturbed him. The weight of whatever Simonson confessed has clearly haunted the priest, but he's so overwhelmed that he's unable to tell exactly what Simonson had said during their conversation. The next morning, Thorne arrives at the office only to be hit with an unexpected development from his boss, Chief Detective Hatcher. Hatcher informs him that the Simonson case is officially closed and hands him a paper to sign, effectively putting an end to the investigation. Thorne, visibly angry, reminds Hatcher that they had an appointment to discuss the case that morning and yells at Hatcher, declaring that he won't risk his job by going along with the cover-up. He storms out of the office. As he leaves, another staff member tosses him a helmet, informing him that Hatcher has reassigned him to riot control. Donovan meets with Governor Santini to update him on the situation. He informs the governor that the board hasn't managed to close the Simonson investigation, and the detective assigned to the case, Thorne, is refusing to comply and close it. Santini, showing little interest in the details, coldly commands Donovan to do whatever is necessary to get the case shut down and remove any obstacles. Meanwhile, at the church, a long line of people waits for their turn at confession. Once alone with the priest, Tab pulls out a silenced pistol and swiftly kills Father Paul, ensuring the priest's secrets about Simonson die with him. Thorne is tasked with managing riot control during the distribution of Soylent Green rations, but chaos erupts unexpectedly. Amid the disorder, Gilbert, Simonson's assassin, is there with a new mission to eliminate Thorne. Amid the turmoil, Gilbert makes 2 failed attempts to shoot Thorne. Realizing he's being targeted, Thorne chases Gilbert through the dense crowd. Just as Thorne closes in, Gilbert manages to shoot Thorne in the right leg, wounding him. However, before Thorne can capture his assailant, Gilbert meets a grim fate. He is crushed to death by the massive scoop of one of the riot control vehicles. Despite his injury, Thorne later returns to Tab's apartment, confronting him and his mistress Martha in a fit of rage. He beats both of them, furious about the attempt on his life. Tab, visibly shaken, fears the repercussions. He knows full well that Thorne is a police officer, and any further retaliation would only bring severe consequences down upon him. Thorne returns to Simonson's apartment, where Cheryl tends to his gunshot wound, carefully removing the bullet and stitching him up. As she cares for him, Cheryl confides that a new tenant is expected to move into the apartment soon, but she also admits she has developed romantic feelings for Thorne. He, however, remains non-committal and tells her that he'll let her know if she should stay with him or continue her arrangement with the new tenant. After resting for about an hour, Thorne prepares to leave. As he steps out into the evening, the wailing of sirens signals the start of the nightly curfew. Later on, a brash and entitled businessman, the potential new tenant, arrives at the apartment. He immediately begins questioning Cheryl about her role in the household, and goes on to detail his daily habits, suggesting what life would be like for her should he choose to move in and keep her as part of the arrangement. Meanwhile, Saul continues his investigation into Soylent's oceanographic reports at the Supreme Exchange, a library and gathering place for intellectuals known as books. After thoroughly analyzing the documents, Saul and the other books make a horrifying discovery. Soylent Green is not made from plankton, as the corporation claims, but from human bodies. The shocking truth is so overwhelming that even after reading it with their own eyes, they struggle to comprehend the horror. Unable to cope with this devastating revelation, Saul decides to end his life through government-assisted euthanasia, a process known as going home. He leaves a note for Thorne at their apartment before heading to the clinic. As Saul undergoes the procedure, he is surrounded by peaceful imagery of Earth's beauty and listens to light classical music as he fades away. Thorne rushes to the clinic, but arrives too late to stop Saul. Helpless, he watches through a window as Saul dies peacefully. In his final moments, Saul shares the dark secret of Soylent Green with Thorne and begs him to follow his body to the processing center. He urges Thorne to uncover the full truth and report it back to the exchange. Thorne descends into the basement of the facility, where he witnesses corpses being loaded onto waste disposal trucks. Determined to uncover the truth, he secretly hitches a ride on one of the trucks. The truck is driven to a heavily guarded waste disposal plant on the outskirts of the city. Upon arrival, the black-clad sanitation workers are escorted away at gunpoint, and a white-clad plant worker takes over driving the truck. The sanitation workers are then sent back to the city in a different truck, while the bodies are delivered to the plant for processing. Inside the plant, Thorne watches in horror as the corpses are fed into a massive machine, processed and turned into Soylent green wafers. The conveyor belt stretches several hundred yards, with the human remains going in at one end and the infamous Soylent green wafers emerging at the other. Just as Thorne begins to comprehend the full scope of the atrocity, he is spotted by two plant workers. A chase ensues through the plant. Thorne manages to kill one worker and subdue the other, narrowly escaping from the facility just as the alarms begin to sound. Thorne returns to the chaotic streets of the city. He first calls Cheryl, telling her that he loves her, and advises her to stay with the new tenant who plans to rent Simonson's apartment. Thorne then places a second call to Hatcher, informing him of his location and that he is under attack. Before he can say more, the line is cut as the assassins close in on him. What follows is a harrowing chase through the city's deserted streets and alleys. One by one, Thorne kills the gunman pursuing him, but Tab manages to shoot him in the back. Wounded, Thorne retreats into a nearby church filled with homeless people. Tab follows closely behind, and the two engage in a brutal, desperate fight. In the end, Thorne manages to kill Tab by stabbing him with a knife, bringing the violent confrontation to a close. The movie concludes with Hatcher and other police officers arriving at the church, where they find Thorne gravely wounded. As Thorne lies there, he desperately tells Hatcher the horrifying truth about Soylent Green, that it's made from human bodies. However, Hatcher looks at him with confusion and disbelief, struggling to process the shocking revelation. As Thorne is placed on a stretcher and carried away by the emergency crew, he summons his remaining strength to shout the truth to the people around him. With his voice echoing through the church, he yells, "Soylent Green is people!" His words hang in the air, a haunting and final revelation, leaving the people in confusion. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.